Hello, welcome to Liberty Today with Reverend Edward. I believe God has been faithful. I trust you've been having a great time in the presence of God. We've been looking at the topic, when He is with you. And what we desire is that at the end of this month, you would have been able to understand and appreciate the significance of God's presence in every situation and in every condition we find ourselves in life. In the last episode, we looked at how God's intervention in the state of the earth in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 caused a turnaround, where what was without form and void and what was full of darkness turned out to be so beautiful that God himself at the end of creation said, he looked at it and he said, it was very good. Now today we'll be taking it a step further. And by a prophet, the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. By a prophet, the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. Now, if you look through scriptures, one thing you would understand, or one thing you will notice, is the fact that God, in several dispensations as recorded in scriptures, has dealt with man in different ways, or through different mediums, through different channels. Now, for what we looked at last week, we saw how God interfered in the situation of the earth directly, and he spoke, he gave instructions, and even from that point, when God would speak to Adam, he would speak to Adam directly. There was no medium, there was no one in between, there was nothing. It was just God speaking directly to Adam, speaking directly to Abel, to Cain, and to everyone he had to talk with. Now, a time came in the development of the children of God that God wanted to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, as recorded in the book of Exodus, and he chose one man. His name was Moses. He called Moses and he sent him on that assignment to get the children of Israel out of Egypt. Now, he took them out, he led them in the wilderness and all that. In all their engagements, there was a time when God wanted to speak to everybody, and they all gathered at the mountain, and Moses went up to the mountain. But when God began to speak, after all the thunderous sounds and everything, when God began to speak, the Israelites said, no. Moses, you go and listen to what the Lord will say. Then when you come, you tell us what the Lord is saying, and whatever you tell us that God has said, we will do. From that point onward, God began to use prophets to reach the people of Israel. And so, as recorded in the Old Testament, the prophets were representatives of God to the people, whereas the priests were representatives of the people to God. So the priests would do sacrifice, the priests would do atonement on behalf of the people before God. But the prophets now were the people that God was speaking through to the people. Now, in 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning from verse 1, we find a situation. Remember, we're still looking at when he is there. We find the situation in 2 Kings chapter 4 from verse 1, where a woman, one of the wives of the sons of the prophet that just died, ran to a prophet, Prophet Elisha. She was in a mess. She was in a mess. Her husband had died, so this was a widow, and certainly she was not a well-to-do widow. She had 2 sons. That was frustration on its own. Looking at your children, looking for food, starvation. But now it was not just that she was a widow who had just lost her husband, who was in this frustrating situation. Her husband was in debt before he died. So this was a widow who was poor, who was in frustration, who had nothing really to hold on to, and who was also in debt and had nothing to pay. Now, it was not just that she was a widow, she had just lost her husband, and she was in debt. The debtors came and they threatened to take her sons away, the only things of value that she had. They threatened to carry these children away. And don't forget that in this kind of situation, she must definitely have been suffering from embarrassment. Now, it was not just that they were going to take the sons away. They were going to take the sons away to be slaves. Can you imagine what she must have been going through at the moment. Can you imagine what psychological trauma she must have been going through at the moment? Her situation was not palatable at all. Her condition was not something to envy at all. But thank God, she recognized that God was present through the prophet. She went to the prophet. She took her challenges in her situation and in her condition. She engaged the prophet. And the prophet gave her instructions. When she carried out the instructions of the prophet, guess what? There was a turnaround. There was a turnaround. So you see, it was not so much that she had the situations and the conditions that she was going through. It was not just enough that she was going through what she was going through. What was significant was the fact that God was within reach. And when she reached out for the representative of God to them at the time, who was the prophet Elisha, there was a turnaround. There was a turnaround. A turnaround is always sure when God is present. A turnaround is always sure when we carry out the instructions and the counsel of the Lord. He gave her instructions. She carried out the instructions. And she did not just have enough to settle the debt. She had enough to sustain the family. And the shame and embarrassment that was moving around her was taken away. Why? She engaged divine presence. So again, I say to you today, there is no situation and there is no condition that you may be going through that cannot be changed by divine interference. So remain optimistic and remain positive, knowing this for sure, that when God is present and when God is engaged, there must always be a turnaround. I'll be coming to you again with yet another instance of divine presence that guarantees a turnaround. God bless you.